The morning sun cast long shadows across the private terminal at airport as Queen stepped from the royal vehicle, her elegant navy coat billowing slightly in the autumn breeze. The familiar weight of Queen Elizabeth's sapphire brooch pinned to her lapel caught the light, a precious reminder of the grandmother-in-law she had grown to love deeply. Today's visit to the Children's Hospital in Manchester was particularly close to her heart, as it had been one of the late Queen's most cherished patronages. Detective Inspector Sarah stood at attention near the security checkpoint, her trained eyes scanning the area with practiced efficiency. 20 years of service with the Metropolitan Police had taught her to notice details others might miss, and today something felt different. The anonymous tip that had come through the Special Investigations Unit 3 days ago still echoed in her mind like an unwelcome whisper. "Your Majesty," the terminal manager approached with a respectful bow, "everything is prepared for your departure. The aircraft has been thoroughly inspected and your security detail is in position." Smiled warmly, her genuine appreciation evident in her expression. Even after all these years in royal life, she never took such dedication for granted. The transition from Duchess to Queen Consort had brought new responsibilities, but also a deeper understanding of the weight that came with wearing the crown jewels and carrying forward Elizabeth's legacy. As she moved toward the departure lounge, thoughts drifted to the conversation she'd had with King Charles the evening before. They had been discussing the upcoming state dinner and which pieces from the royal collection would be most appropriate. The late Queen's jewelry had always been more than mere accessories. Each piece carried stories, memories, and the accumulated wisdom of generations. Detective felt her radio crackle to life, the voice on the other end causing her heart to skip a beat. "Control 2, we have confirmation on the intelligence. Proceed with intercept protocol immediately." The words hit her like ice water. For 3 sleepless nights, she had hoped the anonymous tip would prove false, that someone was playing a cruel joke or seeking attention. The claim was almost unthinkable, that certain pieces from Queen Elizabeth's personal jewelry collection had been removed from their proper custody and were being transported without proper documentation. Paused near a window overlooking the tarmac, watching the ground crew make final preparations for her flight. The sapphire brooch seemed to catch every ray of sunlight, its deep blue stones sparkling with an inner fire that reminded her of Elizabeth's eyes when she laughed. The memory brought both comfort and a sharp pang of loss. "Ma'am," Detective's voice cut through the quiet bustle of the terminal, her tone carefully controlled but unmistakably official. "I'm Detective Inspector with the Metropolitan Police. I need to speak with you regarding a matter of national security." The words seemed to freeze the very air around them. Security detail immediately stepped forward, their hands moving instinctively toward their concealed weapons. The terminal manager's face went pale, and the few other occupants of the private lounge suddenly found themselves caught in a moment that would be etched in their memories forever. "I beg your pardon?" His voice carried the perfect blend of royal authority and genuine confusion. Her years of public service had taught her to maintain composure in unexpected situations, but nothing could have prepared her for this moment. Detective's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her warrant card, the weight of what she was about to do pressing down on her shoulders like a physical burden. "Your Majesty, I have reason to believe that certain items in your possession may be connected to an ongoing investigation involving missing royal artifacts." The silence that followed was deafening. His private secretary stepped forward, his voice sharp with indignation. "Detective, you are speaking to Her Majesty the Queen. I suggest you reconsider both your tone and your accusations." But had seen too much in her career to be intimidated, even in the presence of royalty. The anonymous tip had been followed by photographs, detailed descriptions, and what appeared to be authentic documentation suggesting that several pieces from Queen Elizabeth's private collection had been removed without proper authorization following her death. "I understand the gravity of this situation," continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "However, I have a legal obligation to investigate any claims regarding the royal collection. The crown jewels and personal effects of the late Queen are considered national treasures." Felt the world tilt slightly around her. The sapphire brooch, which moments before had been a cherished connection to her beloved predecessor, suddenly felt heavy against her chest. She thought of the careful way Elizabeth had shown her each piece in the collection, explaining not just their monetary value but their emotional significance, their place in British history. "What exactly are you suggesting, Detective?" voice remained steady, though those who knew her well could detect the slight tremor beneath her composed exterior. Glanced at her notebook, though she had memorized every detail of the report. 3 days ago, we received information suggesting that certain sapphire pieces, including a brooch and matching earrings, were removed from the official inventory at Windsor Castle. The individual who contacted us claims to have photographic evidence of these items being worn in public without proper documentation of their transfer. The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a fire that threatened to consume everything in its path. His mind raced through the conversations she'd had with the royal jewelers, the careful documentation that accompanied every piece, the solemn ceremony when Elizabeth's personal effects had been distributed according to her wishes. Her security detail chief, a man who had served the royal family for over 15 years, stepped forward with barely controlled anger. "Detective, I can assure you that every item in Her Majesty's possession has been properly documented and transferred according to the late Queen's explicit instructions." But had come too far to back down now. The investigation had revealed inconsistencies in the inventory records, gaps in the documentation that couldn't be easily explained. While she had no desire to embarrass the royal family, her duty to the law superseded all other considerations. "I'm sure that's true," replied diplomatically, "but until we can verify the proper chain of custody for certain pieces, I'm afraid I cannot allow them to leave the country. This is a temporary measure while we complete our investigation." Touched the brooch gently, remembering the day Elizabeth had pinned it to her dress for the first time, explaining that it had been a gift from Prince Philip on their 10th wedding anniversary. The idea that she might be wearing something improperly obtained was not just professionally devastating but personally heartbreaking. "The children in Manchester are expecting me," said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of responsibility that came with her position. "The hospital has been planning this visit for months." Felt her resolve waver for a moment, seeing the genuine distress in the Queen's eyes. But the law was the law regardless of titles or positions. "I understand, Your Majesty, and I deeply regret any inconvenience. However, until this matter is resolved, I must ask you to remain in London." The private terminal, usually a haven of calm efficiency, had become the center of a storm that threatened to shake the very foundations of the monarchy. As news of the delay began to spread through official channels, questions faster than answers. Looked out at the waiting aircraft, then at the faces surrounding her, some shocked, some angry, all uncertain about what would happen next. In her heart, she knew that truth would ultimately prevail, but the road ahead promised to be more challenging than any she had faced since becoming queen. The sapphire brooch caught the light one more time, its brilliance now carrying an edge of sadness that seemed to reflect the complexity of the moment. What had begun as a routine royal engagement had become something far more significant, a test not just of legal procedures, but of faith, trust, and the enduring strength of the crown itself. As detective prepared to make the calls that would set official wheels in motion, neither she nor Queen could have imagined how this moment would transform their lives and challenge everything they thought they knew about duty, justice, and the price of truth. The secure conference room at New Scotland Yard had never witnessed a gathering quite like this one. Queen sat with remarkable composure at the polished oak table, her navy coat carefully arranged, while around her swirled a hurricane of legal experts, royal household officials, and senior police officers. The sapphire brooch had been carefully photographed and temporarily secured as evidence, leaving her feeling strangely incomplete, as if a piece of Elizabeth's spirit had been taken from her. Detective Chief Inspector William Hayes entered the room with the weight of 30 years of service visible in his measured steps. He had investigated everything from international art theft to terrorist plots, but never had he faced a situation that could potentially destabilize the very institution he had sworn to protect. The preliminary reports scattered across his desk painted a picture more complex than anyone had initially imagined. "Your Majesty," Hayes began, his voice respectful but firm, "I want to assure you that this investigation is being conducted with the utmost discretion and thoroughness. We are treating this matter with the gravity it deserves." Sir, the Queen's private secretary, adjusted his glasses nervously as he reviewed the documents spread before him. 25 years of managing royal affairs had taught him to navigate diplomatic crises, but this situation challenged every protocol he had ever learned. The implications extended far beyond a single piece of jewelry. They touched the very heart of how the royal collection was managed and transferred. "Chief Inspector," Sir said, his voice carefully modulated, "Her Majesty has complete documentation for every piece in her possession. The transfer of Queen Elizabeth's personal effects was conducted according to her explicit written instructions, witnessed by multiple officials and properly recorded." Found herself thinking about those final months with Elizabeth, the careful conversations about legacy and continuity. The late Queen had been meticulous about everything, especially regarding her jewelry collection. Each piece had been discussed, its history shared, its future home designated with the kind of precision that had characterized Elizabeth's entire reign. Detective entered the room carrying a thick file that seemed to contain more questions than answers. The anonymous tip had led to a deeper investigation that revealed a troubling pattern of inconsistencies in the royal inventory system. While no one questioned the Queen's integrity, the documentation itself appeared to have significant gaps. "Ma'am," addressed directly, "we've discovered that the sapphire brooch in question was listed in 3 different locations within the Royal Collection database. It appears in the Windsor Castle inventory, the palace records, and as part of Queen Elizabeth's personal effects. This kind of discrepancy is what triggered our investigation." The words hit like physical blows. Remembered the day Elizabeth had shown her the brooch, explaining its sentimental value and expressing her wish that it be worn with pride. The idea that there might be confusion about something so precious felt like a betrayal of Elizabeth's memory. King Charles's equerry, Colonel James, had driven through the night to reach London when news of the situation first broke. His military bearing couldn't quite mask his deep concern as he reviewed the growing mountain of evidence. The king was currently in Scotland on official business, but had been briefed on every development through secure channels. "The king is naturally deeply concerned about these allegations," Colonel announced to the assembled group. "He wishes to make clear that the royal household will cooperate fully with this investigation, and that the truth, whatever it may be, must be established beyond question." Hayes nodded grimly, appreciating the king's position but knowing that royal cooperation, while helpful, couldn't override the legal requirements of his investigation. The crown jewels and royal collection were governed by specific laws designed to protect Britain's cultural heritage. Any irregularities, no matter how innocent, had to be thoroughly investigated. "Your Majesty," Hayes continued, addressing directly, "I need to ask you about the specific circumstances under which you received the sapphire brooch. Can you walk us through exactly what happened?" Closed her eyes for a moment, summoning the bittersweet memory with perfect clarity. It had been a quiet afternoon at Windsor Castle, just 6 weeks before Elizabeth's death. The Queen had seemed frailer than usual, but her mind was as sharp as ever as she carefully reviewed her jewelry collection with her granddaughter-in-law. "It was a Tuesday afternoon," began, her voice soft with remembrance. "The Queen had asked me to join her in her private sitting room. She had several boxes laid out on the table, each containing different pieces from her collection. She was very specific about her wishes for each item." The room fell silent as everyone leaned in to hear details that could potentially resolve or deepen the mystery. Sir took careful notes, knowing that every word might be scrutinized by legal experts and historians for generations to come. "She picked up the sapphire brooch and told me it had been a gift from Prince Philip for their 10th wedding anniversary. She said it had brought her happiness for over 70 years, and she wanted it to continue bringing happiness in the future. She pinned it to my dress herself and said it suited me perfectly." Detective exchanged glances with Chief Inspector Hayes. The story was touching and certainly seemed authentic, but it didn't address the fundamental problem of the documentation discrepancies. The royal household's record-keeping system, while generally excellent, appeared to have failed in this specific instance. Lady, the keeper of the royal collection, had arrived from Windsor Castle with additional documentation that only seemed to complicate matters further. Her usually impeccable composure was visibly shaken as she spread more papers across the conference table. "I've brought the original inventory sheets from Queen Elizabeth's private collection," Lady announced, her voice betraying her anxiety. "According to these records, the sapphire brooch was definitively transferred to Her Majesty Queen on September 15th, with proper witnesses and documentation." But had already discovered the problem with those records. "Lady, we've found evidence that suggests someone may have altered the inventory database after Queen Elizabeth's death. The digital timestamps don't match the dates on the physical documentation. The implications of those words sent shockwaves through the room. If someone had tampered with the official records, it meant the investigation had suddenly escalated from a simple inventory discrepancy to potential fraud involving royal artifacts. The anonymous tip was beginning to look less like a mistake and more like evidence of a deliberate deception. Felt the weight of suspicion settling around her like a cold fog. She thought of the children waiting for her visit in Manchester, of the disappointed faces of the hospital staff who had worked so hard to prepare for her arrival. More painfully, she thought of Elizabeth's trust and the possibility that someone was using that sacred bond for malicious purposes. "Chief Inspector," she said quietly, "I want you to investigate this matter as thoroughly as necessary, regardless of where it leads. If someone has manipulated these records, then justice must be served. Queen Elizabeth's legacy deserves nothing less than complete transparency." Hayes nodded with respect, recognizing the courage it took for someone in his position to invite such scrutiny. But courage alone wouldn't solve the growing mystery. The investigation was revealing layers of complexity that suggested something far more serious than simple record-keeping errors. As the afternoon wore on, more disturbing details emerged. The anonymous tipster had provided not just photographs of the brooch, but detailed knowledge of the royal inventory system that suggested inside access. Someone with intimate knowledge of palace procedures was deliberately trying to create a scandal involving Queen and Queen Elizabeth's jewelry. Detective felt the pressure building with each new revelation. What had started as a routine investigation into missing artifacts was becoming a potential case of conspiracy against the crown itself. The question was no longer whether Queen had done anything wrong, but who was orchestrating this elaborate scheme and why they had chosen to target her. Outside the conference room windows, London continued its daily rhythm, unaware that in a nondescript government building, the very foundations of royal protocol were being examined under the harsh light of criminal investigation. The sapphire brooch, locked away as evidence, had become the center of a storm that threatened to engulf far more than anyone had imagined. As evening approached, and the investigation showed no signs of reaching a quick resolution, one thing became increasingly clear. This was not just about a piece of jewelry. Someone was playing a dangerous game with the monarchy itself, and Queen had become an unwitting pawn in a scheme whose true purpose remained hidden in shadows. The investigation had taken an unexpected turn that left everyone in the secure conference room grappling with revelations none of them had anticipated. Digital forensics expert doctor had spent 18 hours analyzing the royal household's computer systems, and her findings painted a picture of sophisticated manipulation that extended far beyond simple record tampering. The alterations to the database weren't random, Doctor explained, her laptop screen displaying complex code sequences that looked like digital fingerprints. Someone with administrative access systematically modified entries related to Queen Elizabeth's personal jewelry collection over a period of several months. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. It was a carefully planned operation. Queen listened with growing dismay as the scope of the deception became clear. What she had initially assumed was a simple misunderstanding about documentation had evolved into evidence of a deliberate conspiracy. The sapphire brooch, still locked away as evidence, represented just one piece of a much larger puzzle that threatened to undermine public trust in the monarchy itself. Detective Chief Inspector Hayes studied the forensic reports with the grim expression of a man who had seen too many investigations spiral beyond their original boundaries. The digital evidence suggested that whoever was behind this scheme had been planning it for months, possibly even before Queen Elizabeth's death. The level of access required meant they were dealing with someone inside the royal household itself. Dr. Hayes said, his voice heavy with the implications, "Can you determine exactly when these modifications began?" The forensics expert scrolled through screens of data that looked like hieroglyphics to everyone else in the room. "The earliest unauthorized access I can definitively identify occurred on August 12th of last year. That's approximately 3 weeks before Queen Elizabeth's death. However, there may have been earlier intrusions that were more carefully concealed." Sir felt his stomach drop as he calculated the timeline. August 12th had been the day of a major software update to the royal household's inventory system, a process that had required temporary administrative access for multiple staff members. If someone had used that opportunity to establish ongoing unauthorized access, they could have been manipulating records for over a year. Colonel had been in constant communication with King Charles throughout the investigation, and the king's concern had grown with each new revelation. The possibility that someone within the royal household had been systematically stealing from Queen Elizabeth's collection while she was still alive was almost too horrifying to contemplate. "Your Majesty," Colonel addressed with visible reluctance, "His Majesty the King requests that you consider whether anyone has shown unusual interest in Queen Elizabeth's jewelry collection in recent months. Any conversations, questions, or behaviors that might have seemed innocent at the time but could now appear suspicious." Closed her eyes, searching her memory for anything that might provide a clue. The months following Elizabeth's death had been a whirlwind of ceremonies, transitions, and administrative details. So many people had been involved in cataloging and transferring the late Queen's possessions that it would be difficult to identify suspicious behavior among all the legitimate activity. Detective had been following a parallel line of investigation, focusing on the anonymous tip that had started everything. The level of detail provided by the tipster suggested either deep inside knowledge or direct involvement in the scheme. After hours of analysis, she was beginning to suspect that the tip itself might be part of the conspiracy rather than evidence of it. "Chief Inspector," announced, entering the room with a new urgency, "I've traced the anonymous tip to a prepaid phone purchased with cash in central London. But more importantly, I've discovered that similar tips were sent to 3 tabloid newspapers on the same day. This wasn't someone trying to help. This was someone trying to create a public scandal." The revelation hit the room like a thunderbolt. If the goal had been to embarrass Queen and damage the monarchy's reputation, then the investigation itself might be playing into the conspiracy's hands. The very act of questioning the Queen's possession of Elizabeth's jewelry was generating exactly the kind of negative publicity the perpetrators had intended. Lady had been conducting her own investigation within the royal household, and her findings added another disturbing dimension to the growing case. Several other pieces from Queen Elizabeth's collection showed similar documentation irregularities, suggesting that the sapphire brooch was just one element in a systematic theft operation. "I've identified at least 12 other items with questionable chain-of-custody documentation," Lady reported, her voice betraying the emotional toll of discovering betrayal within an institution she had served faithfully for 20 years. "The pattern suggests someone was methodically targeting pieces that wouldn't be immediately missed because they weren't part of the official crown jewels." Hayes felt the investigation expanding beyond anything his department was equipped to handle. What had begun as a simple case of missing jewelry was revealing itself as a complex criminal enterprise involving insider knowledge, sophisticated computer skills, and a detailed understanding of royal protocols. This was the kind of case that could define careers and reshape institutions. Queen found herself thinking not just about the immediate crisis, but about the long-term implications for the monarchy. Elizabeth had worked her entire life to build and maintain public trust in the royal institution. The idea that criminals had spent months systematically stealing from her while she was alive, then manipulating the situation to embarrass her successor, felt like a profound violation of everything she had represented. "I need to make something clear," said, her voice carrying a strength that surprised even her. "Regardless of how this investigation concludes, I will not allow Queen Elizabeth's memory to be tainted by these accusations. If someone has stolen from her collection, they will be brought to justice. If someone is using her jewelry to attack the monarchy she devoted her life to serving, they will be exposed." Doctors' continued analysis of the computer systems was revealing even more disturbing details. The unauthorized access had extended beyond simple record modification to include the creation of false documentation that could have been used to sell stolen pieces on the international art market. This was no longer just about internal royal household politics. It was about international art theft on a massive scale. "The sophistication of this operation suggests we're dealing with professionals," Doctor explained. "Someone with expertise in both computer security and art authentication. This isn't the work of a disgruntled employee acting alone." Detective felt pieces of the puzzle beginning to form a picture, though the complete image remained frustratingly unclear. The combination of insider access, technical expertise, and detailed knowledge of the art market suggested a criminal organization that had been planning this operation for years. Queen Elizabeth's death had simply provided the opportunity they had been waiting for. As the investigation entered its second day, the pressure from multiple directions was becoming intense. The hospital in Manchester had been forced to cancel the royal visit, disappointing hundreds of children and staff who had been looking forward to meeting Queen. Media speculation was beginning to build, despite official efforts to maintain secrecy around the investigation. Hayes knew that time was becoming their enemy. The longer the investigation continued without clear resolution, the more likely it was that news of Queen's detention would leak to the press. Once that happened, the damage to the monarchy's reputation would be severe, regardless of the investigation's eventual outcome. "We need to accelerate our timeline," Hayes announced to the assembled team. "Doctor, how quickly can you complete your analysis of the computer systems? What's the status of your investigation into the anonymous tip? We need answers before this situation becomes public." The investigation team worked through the night, driven by the knowledge that they were racing against both criminal conspirators and the relentless clock of media attention. In a small evidence room, the sapphire brooch sat under bright lights, its blue stones catching reflections that seemed to hold secrets no one had yet learned to read. Queen remained in the conference room, declining offers to return to palace while the investigation continued. She understood that leaving could be interpreted as either guilt or royal privilege, neither of which served the cause of justice. Elizabeth had taught her that sometimes the crown's greatest strength lay in its willingness to submit to the same laws that governed everyone else. As dawn approached and the investigation continued its relentless pace, it was becoming clear that the resolution, when it finally came, would reshape not just the royal household, but the very way Britain protected its national treasures from those who would exploit them for personal gain. The breakthrough came at 4:17 a.m. when Doctor discovered a hidden partition in the royal household's computer network that contained detailed photographs and appraisals of dozens of pieces from Queen Elizabeth's collection. The images had been taken with professional equipment and included measurements and condition reports that could only have been compiled by someone with unrestricted access to the jewelry itself. Detectives stared at the evidence spread across multiple screens, finally seeing the criminal enterprise in its full scope. This wasn't just about stealing individual pieces. Someone had been systematically documenting the entire collection with the precision of professional art dealers preparing for a major sale. "Chief Inspector," called out, her voice tight with excitement and exhaustion, "we've found our smoking gun." These photographs were taken over a period of 18 months, and they include pieces that weren't supposed to be accessible to anyone outside the immediate royal family. Hayes rushed to examine the digital evidence, his experienced eye immediately recognizing the implications. The hidden files contained enough information to facilitate the theft and sale of royal artifacts worth millions of pounds. More importantly, they provided a clear timeline that exonerated Queen of any wrongdoing while revealing the true scope of the criminal conspiracy. Queen felt a mixture of relief and heartbreak as the evidence began to clear her name while simultaneously revealing the depth of betrayal within Elizabeth's trusted circle. The late Queen had been surrounded by people she believed were loyal guardians of her legacy, when in reality, at least one of them had been systematically cataloging her most precious possessions for criminal purposes. Lady had been cross-referencing the digital evidence with physical inventory records throughout the night, and her findings painted an even more disturbing picture. Several high-value pieces that appeared in the hidden photographs had been reported as temporarily relocated for cleaning or repair in the official records, but had never been returned to their designated locations. "The theft has been ongoing for nearly 2 years, Lady announced, her voice heavy with the weight of institutional failure. They were using legitimate maintenance procedures as cover for removing pieces from the collection. By the time we realized anything was missing, the documentation had been altered to make it appear as if the items had been properly transferred or were undergoing routine care." Sir felt the full magnitude of the security breach settling on his shoulders like a physical weight. As the person responsible for overseeing the royal household's administrative functions, he would have to answer difficult questions about how such an extensive operation could have continued undetected for so long. Doctors' continued analysis revealed that the unauthorized access had been facilitated by a sophisticated piece of malware that had been introduced during routine software updates. The person responsible clearly had extensive technical knowledge and had been planning the operation for years before implementing it. The malware was designed to be nearly undetectable, Doctor explained. It created a parallel tracking system that allowed the thieves to monitor which pieces were being viewed or accessed by legitimate staff members. They could time their thefts to avoid detection and knew exactly when items would be missed. Detective had been tracing the digital fingerprints left by the unauthorized access, and her investigation was pointing toward a shocking conclusion. The level of access and detailed knowledge of royal protocols suggested that the person responsible wasn't just an employee of the royal household, but someone in a position of significant trust and authority. "Chief Inspector," said quietly, pulling Hayes aside, "the access logs are pointing to someone with administrative privileges in the keeper's office. Someone who would have had legitimate reasons to access the collection database and wouldn't have raised suspicions with frequent queries." Hayes felt his stomach tight as he realized they were potentially dealing with betrayal at the highest levels of royal household management. The investigation had evolved from questioning Queen's integrity to exposing systemic corruption within the very institution charged with protecting Britain's cultural heritage. As the sun rose over London, painting the conference room in golden light, the investigation team prepared to make arrests that would send shockwaves through the royal establishment. The evidence was overwhelming, but the emotional cost of the revelations weighed heavily on everyone involved. Queen had remained remarkably composed throughout the ordeal, but the toll was visible in her eyes as she contemplated how Elizabeth would have reacted to learning that trusted advisors had been stealing from her personal collection while she was still alive. The violation went beyond mere theft. It was a betrayal of the sacred trust that formed the foundation of the monarchy itself. Colonel had been coordinating with King Charles throughout the night, and the king's response had been swift and decisive. New security protocols would be implemented immediately, the entire inventory system would be rebuilt from scratch, and every member of the royal household with access to the collection would undergo thorough background investigations. "His Majesty wants it clearly understood," Colonel announced, "that this investigation represents exactly the kind of transparency and accountability the monarchy must embody. No one, regardless of position or length of service, will be above suspicion when it comes to protecting the nation's heritage." The arrest of Thomas, senior assistant to the keeper of the royal collection, came as a shock even to those who had been following the investigation's development. Had served the royal household for 15 years, and had been considered one of the most knowledgeable and dedicated staff members. His expertise in art authentication and his trusted position had made him the perfect inside accomplice for an international art theft ring. Doctor's analysis revealed that it had been selling detailed information about the royal collection to criminal contacts for over 3 years, long before he began actually stealing pieces. The systematic documentation found in the hidden computer files had been his way of providing buyers with the detailed provenance and condition, reports necessary for high-value art transactions. Detective felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness as the pieces of the puzzle finally came together. The anonymous tip that had started everything hadn't been from a concerned, but from himself, who had become nervous about the investigation closing in and had decided to create a distraction by directing suspicion toward Queen. The tip was designed to shift attention away from the systematic thefts and onto a single piece of jewelry, explained to the assembled team. By questioning the Queen's possession of the sapphire brooch, hoped to discredit the entire investigation as a political attack on the monarchy. Hayes coordinated with international law enforcement agencies as the investigation revealed connections to art theft rings operating in Switzerland and New York. Several pieces from Queen Elizabeth's collection had already been sold through private dealers to collectors who believed they were purchasing legitimately available items. The recovery operation would take months and involve diplomatic negotiations with multiple countries. But the most important victory was the vindication of Queen and the restoration of public confidence in the royal household's integrity. As the formal charges were prepared against and his criminal associates, Queen was finally able to reclaim the sapphire brooch that had started the entire investigation. Holding it in her hands once again, she felt the weight of Elizabeth's trust and the responsibility that came with carrying forward her legacy. "This investigation has been painful for everyone involved," said in a statement that would later be released to the press. "But it has also demonstrated the monarchy's commitment to transparency and justice." Queen Elizabeth's jewelry collection represents not just material wealth, but the history and heritage of our nation. Those who would steal from that legacy have dishonored not only her memory, but the trust placed in them by the British people. The hospital visit to Manchester was rescheduled for the following week, and when Queen finally arrived wearing the sapphire brooch, it carried a deeper meaning than ever before. The children and staff welcomed her with enthusiasm that seemed to acknowledge not just her royal status, but her dignity in facing adversity with grace and determination. Detective would later reflect that the case had taught her something important about the nature of justice and the responsibility that came with protecting institutions larger than any individual. The monarchy's willingness to submit to investigation and accept the consequences had ultimately strengthened rather than weakened public trust. Doctors' computer security recommendations would lead to a complete overhaul of the royal household's digital systems, creating protections that would serve as a model for cultural institutions around the world. The painful lessons of the investigation would help ensure that future generations of royal artifacts would be protected from those who would exploit them for personal gain. The sapphire brooch, once again resting on Queen's lapel where Queen Elizabeth had intended it to be, caught the light streaming through the hospital windows as she read stories to delighted children. The jewelry's journey through suspicion and vindication had only deepened its meaning as a symbol of continuity, trust, and the enduring strength of truth over deception. Years later, historians would mark the investigation as a turning point that demonstrated the monarchy's ability to adapt and reform while maintaining its essential character. Queen's dignity during the crisis had shown that the crown's greatest strength lay not in avoiding scrutiny, but in meeting it with honesty and courage. The case files would eventually be sealed for 50 years to protect ongoing international investigations. But the lessons learned would immediately begin shaping how Britain protected its cultural treasures and maintained the delicate balance between tradition and accountability that defined the modern monarchy.